The night I opened the letter, my hands trembled. My own sister had raised my rent from $2,350 to $7,100. When I confronted her, she smirked, and our parents, people I thought would defend me, looked me dead in the eyes and said, "It's fair." My chest burned with betrayal. But what none of them knew was that this injustice would become the very reason I rose higher than all of them combined. Zinel sat at her small kitchen table, the envelope trembling in her hands. She thought it was just another routine notice, maybe about maintenance or utilities. But when her eyes fell on the number, $7,100, her chest tightened, and her breath caught. Just yesterday, her rent was $2,350, already a stretch she managed with careful budgeting. But this was more than 3 times that amount. Her heart sank. It wasn't just a number. It was a weapon aimed at her stability. She stormed into the living room, where Karabo sat scrolling on her phone, nails polished, face calm with that smug expression only she could wear. Zinel held the letter up with shaking hands. "Karabo, what is this? How can you raise the rent like this? It's impossible. I can't afford this." Her voice cracked between disbelief and anger. Karabo didn't even flinch. Instead, she leaned back, a sly smile stretching across her lips. "It's business, Zinel. If you can't afford it, then leave. Simple." Her words cut sharper than any blade. There was no hesitation, no sympathy, not even the faintest shadow of sisterly concern. It was as if she was speaking to a stranger, not the sister who once carried her through hard times. Zinel felt the room spin. Memories flashed through her mind. How she once worked extra shifts to help Karabo pay her tuition. How she lent her money when she was broke. How she defended her when people doubted her. And now, that same sister stood in front of her, treating her like an unwanted tenant instead of blood. Her lips parted, but no words came. It wasn't just about the money. It was about betrayal. About the cruel satisfaction in Karabo's eyes as if she wanted to watch her crumble. Zinel felt her dignity slipping away in that moment, replaced by a burning mixture of pain and anger. She placed the letter on the table, her hands trembling but her voice low and steady. "You're my sister, Karabo. I never thought I'd see this day." Karabo only shrugged, her smirk widening, enjoying every second of Zinel's breaking heart. The silence between them was heavier than words. Zinel walked back to her room, clutching her chest, knowing this wasn't just about rent. It was the moment that would change Everett. Zinel sat on the edge of her bed that night, clutching the rent notice as though it were a piece of burning coal. She couldn't sleep. Her mind kept circling back to the same thought. Surely, our parents will see this for what it is. Surely, they won't let Karabo do this to me. With that fragile hope, she folded the letter and made her way to her parents' house the next morning. Tebogo and Masigo were sitting in the lounge, sipping tea, their voices low in conversation. Zinel walked in, her face pale, her hands trembling. She laid the letter on the table between them. "Mama, Papa, Karabo raised my rent from $2,350 to $7,100. This can't be right. Please, you have to talk to her. You know I can't pay this. It's not fair." Her voice cracked as she pleaded, expecting the warmth of their comfort. But instead of shock or concern, her mother, Masigo, simply leaned back, her eyes cold, and said, "Life isn't meant to be easy, Zinel. Maybe it's time you learn to stand on your own feet." Her father, Tebogo, didn't even look at her directly. He nodded slightly, adding, "Karabo owns the property. She sets the rules. If she says the rent is $7,100, then it's fair. Either you pay, or you move out." His voice was flat, almost rehearsed, as if her pain meant nothing. Zinel's mouth fell open. For a moment, she thought she hadn't heard them correctly. These were the same parents who once told her family was everything, who made her believe they would always protect her. Yet now they sat across from her, siding with Karabo without hesitation. Her chest burned, not just from anger but from the sting of rejection that cut straight to her soul. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them see her break. "So this is it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You'd rather watch me struggle than stand against her greed?" Neither of them answered. Instead, her mother took another sip of tea as if nothing had been said. Zinel felt the room grow colder, the walls pressing in around her. The people she thought would fight for her had chosen against her. In that moment, she realized something painful but clear. She was truly on her own. Zinel closed the door to her small room and leaned against it, her knees weakening until she slid down to the floor. The silence inside those four walls was heavy, pressing on her chest. She held her face in her hands, but the tears came anyway, hot and unrelenting. For the first time in a long while, she didn't even try to stop them. The betrayal cut too deep. Her mind wandered back through the years, uninvited memories flooding in. She remembered the long nights she stayed awake helping Karabo with her assignments during college. When Karabo cried about tuition fees, it was Zinel who skipped meals and picked up extra shifts just to lend her money. She never once hesitated, because family was family. She remembered how, when Karabo's first apartment lease fell through, she opened her doors without asking for a cent. She told herself then, "This is what sisters do. We protect each other." But now, sitting in the same house where she once offered warmth, she held a rent notice that felt like a knife twisting in her chest. Karabo hadn't just raised the rent, she had raised a wall between them. A cruel, deliberate wall. Her sobs grew louder, but there was no one to hear them. No one to care. She thought of her parents, their blank faces, their cold words. How quickly they chose Karabo's side. How easily they brushed her aside as though she had never been their daughter, only a tenant in her own life. The more she thought about it, the harder the tears fell. "After everything I did for them, after everything I gave," she whispered into the empty room. Her voice cracked, and she hugged her knees tighter, as if holding herself was the only comfort left. Her kindness, the sacrifices, the loyalty, it all felt wasted now. Every memory of love and trust seemed to mock her, replaying in her mind as if to remind her of her own naivety. She had given them everything she could, and what did she get in return? A cruel smirk from her sister, cold dismissal from her parents, and a demand designed to break her. In that moment, Zinel felt smaller than she ever had before. The tears slowed, leaving her exhausted and hollow, but a quiet storm was beginning to form deep inside her heart. She didn't know how yet, but she knew this pain wouldn't be the end of her. It would one day become her reason to rise. The dining room buzzed with voices, the clinking of cutlery and bursts of laughter. Plates of food were passed around the long wooden table where uncles, aunts, cousins, and grandparents gathered. It should have been a night of warmth, of family bonding, but for Zinel, it felt like walking into a lion's den. She sat quietly at the corner of the table, hoping to blend into the background, but Karabo had other plans. With a smirk playing on her lips, Karabo leaned forward, her voice rising just enough for everyone to hear. "Some people," she said, glancing directly at Zinel, "can't even manage their own lives. Always crying about bills, always struggling. Imagine being grown and still failing at the basics." The words landed like stones thrown in public. The room erupted. Some relatives chuckled, hiding their laughter behind their hands, while others whispered behind napkins. Zinel could hear them. "She's failed at life, poor thing." The words sliced into her, deeper than a knife could. She forced her eyes down at her plate, her fingers tightening around her fork, her stomach twisting too much to even take a bite. Karabo wasn't done. She lifted her glass of wine and continued, "But maybe it's good, hey? Some people need to learn the hard way. Life isn't for the weak." The cousins sitting closest to her burst out laughing, clapping the table as though her cruelty was entertainment. Zinel sat frozen. Inside, her heart burned with humiliation. Yet on the outside, she remained quiet. She wanted to scream, to remind them of all the times she had helped, all the sacrifices she had made, but she swallowed it all. Her silence filled the air like an invisible shield, though to them it looked like defeat. Her mother, Masigo, didn't defend her. Her father, Tabogo, looked on with a faint smile, as if the mockery was nothing more than harmless banter. Their indifference hurt even more than Karabo's words. As the laughter echoed around her, Zinel's eyes glistened, but she refused to let a single tear fall in front of them. She pressed her lips together, tasting the bitterness of betrayal, and sat upright, forcing herself to appear unmoved. They thought her silence meant weakness. They thought her stillness meant surrender. But inside, beneath the ache and the shame, something else stirred, something stronger than the laughter that tried to break her. That night, when the family gathering ended and the laughter still echoed faintly in her mind, Zinel sat alone in her room staring at the ceiling. The humiliation clung to her like a heavy blanket, but underneath that pain was a new kind of fire. She wiped her eyes, sat up straight, and whispered into the silence, "Never again. I will never beg them for anything again." It wasn't just words. It was a vow carved deep into her soul. From that moment, everything about her, Faye, began to change. She pulled out her notebook and wrote down every single expense she had, from groceries to transport to electricity. One by one, she cut away anything she didn't need. No more takeout, no more unnecessary bus rides, no more small indulgences. She learned to stretch a single meal for 2 days, to reuse, to repair, to make do with less. Her apartment grew emptier, but her resolve grew stronger. Each morning, while the rest of the world still slept, Zinal was up, hustling. She took on cleaning jobs in the early hours, scrubbing offices and homes with quiet determination. In the afternoons, she tutored schoolchildren, patiently helping them with math and English. At night, she signed up for food delivery shifts, pedaling her bike through the cold streets just to earn a few extra dollars. Her body ached, her feet blistered, but she refused to complain. Every coin she earned went into a jar hidden in the corner of her room, a silent reminder of the empire she was slowly building. Her friends noticed she no longer joined them for outings. Relatives whispered that she was struggling worse than before. But Zinal stayed quiet. She didn't need them to see her grind. She wanted them to see her results. And with every dollar she saved, with every bill she paid on her own, her heart grew lighter. Late at night, when exhaustion tried to crush her spirit, she looked at her reflection in the mirror and whispered again, "Never again." The words became her shield, her anthem, her power. What her family thought was her breaking point had instead lit a spark inside her, one that would soon grow into a flame too bright for anyone to ignore. One evening after a long tutoring session, Zinal was walking home with tired eyes and sore feet. She carried her usual bag of notes and scraps of paper, where she tracked every cent she earned. Along the way, she bumped into a colleague, Saifo, who worked at the same tutoring center. He noticed her exhaustion but also the quiet determination in her face. After a few moments of small talk, he leaned closer and said, "Zinal, I know you're serious about changing your life. There's this small startup real estate project I've joined. It's risky, but it could be something big." At first, Zinal hesitated. Investment sounded like a world far from her reality, a world for people with savings and safety nets, things she didn't have. But that night, as she sat by the jar of money she had been saving for months, she thought about everything she had been through. Her sister's smirk, her parents' betrayal, the laughter at the dinner table, all of it played in her mind. She realized she had nothing to lose except the chains of her current life. With a deep breath, she whispered to herself, "This is my chance." The next day, she met Saifo and asked for every detail. She listened carefully, asked sharp questions, and spent nights researching on her old laptop. Though fear gnawed at her, courage pushed her forward. She decided to take the risk. She poured almost every coin from her jar into the investment. It wasn't much compared to what others put in, but it was everything she had. Once the money was in, she didn't sit back and wait. Zinal threw herself into the project, volunteering to help with the smallest tasks, managing spreadsheets, designing flyers, calling potential tenants, even helping clean units before viewings. She worked day and night, learning quickly and proving herself useful. The others in the group began to notice her dedication. And slowly, she became more than just an investor. She became part of the heartbeat of the venture. Each day brought new challenges and new fears, but also new hope. For the first time in a long time, Zinal felt like she was building something that belonged to her. The risk was terrifying, but the thought of staying small and silent terrified her even more. This hidden opportunity was more than just an investment. It was the doorway to the life her family never imagined she could have. The months that followed were some of the hardest of Zinal's life. Her days began before sunrise and ended long after midnight. In the mornings, she still took on tutoring and delivery jobs, making sure she could cover her basic needs. In the afternoons and evenings, she threw herself into the real estate project. She learned how to draft contracts, how to negotiate rent, and even how to deal with tenants who shouted at her over broken taps or late repairs. Every challenge that came her way felt like another mountain, but she climbed each one with trembling hands and a determined heart. Exhaustion became her daily companion. Her body ached, her eyes burned from staring at her laptop screen for hours, and there were nights when she fell asleep with her notes scattered around her bed. Yet inside her, a fire kept burning. She remembered her sister's smirk, her parents' cold eyes, and the mocking whispers of her relatives. That pain pushed her forward, fueling her to endure the struggle. Every time she wanted to quit, she would whisper to herself, "This is not the end. This is the climb." As the weeks turned into months, Zinel began to notice small victories. The startup project she had poured her money into started growing. Units were being rented, contracts were being signed, and profits, though small at first, began to show. Each time she received her share, she didn't waste it. Instead, she reinvested, studied more, and built her knowledge. She devoured books, attended free workshops, and asked endless questions, determined to understand the business inside and out. With time, she no longer felt like an outsider in the world of property. She became confident in meetings, offering ideas that surprised even the older, more experienced investors. Her voice, once quiet and overlooked, started carrying weight. People began listening to her, respecting her, even seeking her advice. The girl who was once mocked for failing at life was now rising, brick by brick, deal by deal. Though the climb was steep and often lonely, Zinel knew she was no longer the same woman who once cried alone in her room. She was becoming stronger, sharper, and more unshakable with every step. And deep down, she knew this climb was only the beginning. The silence that once surrounded Karabo's arrogance began to crack. Her life of luxury, built on pride and borrowed money, started showing its weak foundation. Creditors called more often. Bills piled up on her desk, and the once confident smirk she wore began to fade into frustration. She had grown so used to spending recklessly, designer clothes, expensive parties, flashy cars, that she never imagined the well could run dry. But now, her lavish lifestyle was catching up with her, and the debts kept rising like a flood she could no longer stop. Tabogo and Masigo, who had once sided with Karabo so confidently, were no better. Their own businesses were crumbling under poor decisions and economic struggles. The couple that once told Zinel the rent increase was fair, now found themselves sitting in silence at their kitchen table, staring at unpaid bills they could no longer hide from. Their pride kept them from asking for help, but deep inside, they felt the sting of regret. They had pushed their daughter away in her time of need, and now the weight of that choice hung heavy in their home. Meanwhile, whispers began to spread in the family and the community. People who had mocked Zinel before were now quietly talking about her growth. They said she was investing, that she was working with people in real estate, that she was slowly becoming someone important. At first, Karabo brushed off these rumors with a scoff, claiming they were exaggerations. But when she overheard respected relatives praising Zinel's discipline and drive, something inside her twisted. The very sister she had mocked as weak was now being spoken of with admiration. Late at night, when Karabo sat alone in her grand but half-empty house, she thought about the letter she had given Zinel. The rent increase that she believed would break her. Instead of shattering her, it had pushed her into something greater. Now, with debt suffocating her and her once loyal friends disappearing, she realized the tables were slowly turning. For the first time, Tabogo, Masigo, and Karabo all felt the sharp edge of their choices. The daughter and sister they had abandoned was no longer beneath them. Quietly, without noise or boast, Zinel was rising, and her shadow was beginning to tower over them all. The air at the family gathering was heavy with chatter and laughter, but beneath it all was tension. Karabo strutted in with her usual arrogance, though her eyes carried the weight of sleepless nights and unpaid debts. Still, pride wouldn't let her show weakness. When she spotted Zinel entering the room with quiet confidence, dressed with elegance that spoke of success, Karabo's lips curled into a mocking smile. "Ah, my little sister," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I hope you managed to pay your rent this month, or did you finally beg someone to help you?" Laughter erupted from a few relatives who always sided with Karabo, eager to enjoy another public humiliation. But this time Zinel didn't flinch. She didn't bow her head or hide her pain. Instead, she walked to the center of the room, her step steady, her voice calm. "Karabo," she began, her eyes never leaving her sister's. "You once told me if I couldn't afford to stay I should leave. And I did. But what you didn't know is that leaving was the best thing that ever happened to me." She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. The laughter died down as the rustle of papers filled the silence. One by one, Zinel laid the documents on the table. These are proof of ownership, she said clearly, her voice carrying authority. I am now the majority shareholder in the company that bought your property after you failed to keep up with your debts. The room froze. Gasps echoed like a wave, spreading from one relative to another. Heads turned, eyes widened, and whispers grew into stunned murmurs. Karabo's face drained of color, her smirk collapsing into shock as she grabbed one of the papers with trembling hands. Her eyes scanned the words, her mouth opening but no words coming out. For once, the sister who always mocked and controlled the room had nothing to say. Zinel stood tall, her calmness more powerful than any insult. The very people who had once mocked her now looked at her with awe, realizing she had not only survived but surpassed them all. In that moment, the power had shifted completely. Karabo's throne of arrogance had crumbled, and Zinel had risen higher than anyone ever imagined. Karabo's hands shook as she clutched the papers, her eyes darting across the words she wished were a lie. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. For years, she had lived in arrogance, mocking her sister at every turn, believing she held all the power. Yet now, in front of the same family she once used to laugh at Zinel, she was the one stripped of dignity. Pale and trembling, she slowly sank into her chair, her pride collapsing under the weight of truth. The whispers in the room grew louder, relatives exchanging shocked glances, unable to believe what they had just witnessed, that the same woman they had once ridiculed was now the one holding everything together. Zinel stood tall, her calm presence commanding the space without effort. She looked at her sister, not with anger, but with a quiet strength that pierced deeper than any insult ever could. In a steady voice she said, "You raised my rent to break me, but you only raised me into who I was meant to become." Her words cut through the air, and the silence that followed felt like the world itself was holding its breath. Karabo lowered her eyes, ashamed, realizing the cruel game she had once played had turned into her downfall. She was now renting from the sister she mocked, trapped in the very cycle she had tried to use to destroy Zinel. Their parents, Tabogo and Masigo, sat frozen, their faces drained, knowing they had sided with the wrong child, their fairness, now exposed as blind betrayal. Relatives who once whispered mockery now nodded in respect. Some clapped softly, others simply stared at Zinel with new admiration. For them, the lesson was clear. Power built on cruelty never lasts, but strength built on perseverance cannot be broken. As Zinel turned to leave the gathering, her head high and her steps firm, her voice echoed in narration. They called it fair, but fairness has a way of finding its true owner. The family sat in silence, the echoes of her words lingering like a shadow. Zinel did not just walk away victorious. She walked away free, carrying with her the kind of power no one could ever take away again. If this story touched your heart, don't just scroll past. Share it with someone who needs to hear that rejection is not the end. It's the beginning of something greater. Broken Heart Right Arrow Fire follow for more powerful stories of resilience, courage, and rise against the odds. Sparkle's #KeepRising #Unstoppable.